Ayrton Senna da Silva, Brazil's hero, and until the 1990s, relatively unlucky at his home Grand Prix. In 1984, Senna qualified ahead of his teammate for his Grand Prix debut, but it lasted only 8 laps before he retired with a turbo failure. In 1985, he lasted 48 laps before his electronics did him in. In 86, Senna had a shot at the win, taking pole position by a whole 0.8 of a second, but his race pace was no match for the Williams of Nelson Piquet, who led home the Brazilian 1-2. 87, 88 and 89 came and went with no points at all for varying reasons, and in 1990 he was leading the race considerably until this unfortunate collision with his former teammate Satoru Nakajima. However, come 1991, Senna was a double world champion and surely the favourite to win in Brazil. He had already won the first race of the season in Phoenix, and by taking pole by 38 hundredths of a second, he once again demonstrated his hunger for victory. Behind the dominant Senna on the grid were the Williamses of Riccardo Patrese and Nigel Mansell, and then Senna's teammate Berger was fourth. Best of the rest behind them were the Ferraris of Alesi and Prost, and then a whole row of Brazilian drivers with Piquet and Gugelmin. Only one Lotus qualified for the race, with that being Mika Hakkinen in 22nd place, with his teammate Julian Bailey being one of 8 drivers failing to make the cut. Surprisingly, multi-time Driver of the Day recipient Michele Alboreto also failed to qualify for the 10th time in his rollercoaster of a career. When the race got underway, Senna immediately staked claim to the lead, with Mansell beating Patrese to turn 1 for second. Behind them, Berger was seemingly throwing smoke in the air, and Emanuele Pirro ran over the slightly damp grass in order to avoid a Jordan. There was no contact, although the crunch count wouldn't have to wait long before claiming Gabriele Tarquini and his AGS. You may also have noticed a gap on the starting grid as well, and that's because of Aguri Suzuki having fuel pump issues and failing to start the race, although confusingly the official results list him as a starter. At the end of the first lap, the order was Senna, Mansell, Patrese, Alesi and Berger. This order would stay the same for the first few laps of the race, and before long Senna and Mansell began to build up a gap over the field. By this point the other McLaren had stopped smoking too, which is a positive because no one likes an overcooked burger. In all seriousness, the issue was probably just caused by the car burning off excess fluids at the start, which often happened back in those days. Whoa, looks like some oil dust or something down there at Decido do Lago. Either that or Frank Montani's been having a party there. Oh, and that's a real shame there. That's Mauricio Gugelmin retiring early after an extremely promising qualifying. Strangely, Wikipedia lists his reason for retirement as physical, which usually means a driver was ill or developed heatstroke or something like that. Luckily, he recovered from whatever his ailment was in time for the next Grand Prix a month later at Imola. Gah, remember the days where there would sometimes be a month between races? Nowadays we barely get that over the winter. Whoa, Satoru, how have you ended up there? Guy looks like he's halfway up a mountain. Looks like it's the corner where he had his 1990 incident with Senna too. Look at Ayrton going by like, haha. Oh, and that's the other Tyrrellers Stefano Modena dropping out with gearbox issues. By this point, Ivan Capelli's Leighton House had also given up the ghost, and before long they would be joined by De Cesaris' Jordan and Leto's Dallara. For the first 26 laps of the race, Senna and Mansell had lapped in tandem, separated by rarely more than a couple of seconds, but when Mansell made his stop, his car struggled to restart and he dropped a whole heap of time. He eventually returned to the race behind Patrese, Alesi and Berger, although they were all yet to make their stops, and after everyone had pitted, the gap was 7 seconds between Senna and Mansell. Good move here for 4th place, that's Berger on Piquet on the main straight. Admittedly, it was always likely to happen, since these two were on different strategies and the McLaren was a faster car anyway, but it was still an important move to make and Piquet still didn't make it easy. Meanwhile, Berger's teammate Senna was actually being caught by Mansell, who was now within 5 seconds of his gearbox. A gearbox that, unbeknownst to Senna, would soon play a part in one of the most legendary drives of his career. I smell foreshadowing. Oops, there goes Pierluigi Martini. In all honesty, that's seriously unlucky. He kept the engine running, but that's no good if your wheels aren't on the ground, so that's a retirement. Also out of the race by this point were Eric Bernard's Lola and Mark Blundell's Brabham. On lap 50 there was drama as Mansell made an unscheduled pit stop, apparently due to a puncture. Luckily this time his car started, but by this point Senna was long gone. However, up in front of the race, Senna's gearbox was starting to fail. By this point, he had actually lost fourth gear, causing him to have to skip straight from third to fifth and lose vital acceleration on the straights. Some drivers would probably have retired the car with such an issue, but not Ayrton Senna, and not in front of his home crowd. There were 21 laps still to go, and Senna had a big lead, but both Williamses were catching fast. A car with even bigger issues was the Ligier of Eric Coma, which caught fire after its engine expired. This was actually the first time that Eric had started a Grand Prix since he failed to qualify in Phoenix, and of course nowadays he's most famous for his friendship with Ayrton Senna, who came to his rescue after a massive crash in '92. 1991 was arguably Ligier's worst ever season in F1, as they failed to score a single point for the second year in a row. Meanwhile, that's Mansell! Turns out it wasn't only Senna having gearbox troubles. Nigel Mansell's Williams was also struggling, and on lap 60 his gearbox failed and he spun out of the race. In all honesty, Mansell would almost definitely have won this race if his car had held out, but if is F1 spelt backwards, as the great Murray Walker used to say. Patrese was now second, followed by Berger, Prost and Piquet. Oh, that's scary. Don't do that, Nigel, come on. Actually, I can make this better. Back to the action, here's Bertrand Gachot retiring the second Jordan with just 6 laps to go. No points for Jordan just yet. Back to the front of the field, you can visually see the gap between Senna and Patrese. At one point the lead had been 38 seconds, but with 2 laps to go it was just 5. Incredibly, Senna was now driving without the use of 3rd, 4th or 5th gear, basically restricting him to 6th gear only, even in the slow corners. Every single time he slowed down he was at risk of stalling, and the car felt unbelievably heavy in the corners as F1 hadn't yet developed power steering. As the race drew to a close, Ayrton was developing muscle cramps all over his body from the sheer exertion of driving the car. His only saving grace was that Patrese was having gearbox issues of his own, although not nearly to the extent that Senna was. At this rate, Gerhard Berger had a real chance of snatching a victory. In the end, despite all the odds and with rain beginning to fall, Ayrton Senna crossed the line to win the Brazilian Grand Prix. He was in tremendous pain and extremely emotional, and just listen to what it meant to him. I have vivid memories of watching the Senna documentary as a kid and hearing Ayrton screaming and swearing over the radio, and for the first time truly understanding what it means to achieve your life goal. Given the circumstances, I believe that there's not a single person in the world who could have done what he did on that day. He was a man fueled by determination alone, and he delivered possibly the greatest drive in Formula One history. Rest in peace, Ayrton Senna, the world misses you. Guys, before I give this race a score, I want to let you know that I have a Dailymotion account for all the videos that get taken down from my YouTube channel by the pesky FOM bots. Due to the high levels of parody, review and education my videos contain, I believe that all of them fall under fair use, but sadly this isn't always enough. On my Dailymotion, you can find the 1996 Monaco and Portuguese Grand Prix, as well as the 2008 Japanese Grand Prix, and more. I also now have a Twitch channel, where I stream about once a week and would really like to grow my audience. The links to both of these accounts are in the description of this video. Thank you. I gave the Grand Prix a 9 out of 10 for its unpredictability and its tension from start to finish. The 3 bonus points are for Ayrton's legendary and historic drive, the adoring Brazilian fans themselves, and the overwhelming sense of joy that one feels when watching the end of this race. It was undoubtedly one of the greatest moments in F1 history. I'll give the Driver of the Day award for Best Driver to Ayrton Senna because, well, duh. The effort of this drive was so great that he had to be taken to the podium by medical car, and he could barely lift the trophy. With that being said, an honourable mention does have to go to Gianni Morbidelli, who finished 8th in his Minardi from 21st on the grid, although unfortunately the points only went down to 6th in those days. As for the Unua Trophy, no one really stood out as being particularly bad, but I'll give the award for worst driver to Roberto Moreno, who was rather slow all day and nearly got lapped by his teammate. Drive safely guys, and I'll see you next time.